Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're navigating what feels like increasingly common territory in modern life.
Mhm.
That really confusing gap that can sometimes open up between what a brand says it is, its public image, and how its systems actually operate day to day.
Exactly. And we're diving into optical care today, which, it should be all about clarity, right? By its very nature.
It should. But the experience we're unpacking, based on a listener's detailed account, well, it became the opposite. Mired in complexity, weird ghost appointments, and what sounds like a pretty major communication breakdown.
That gap, that dissonance is really the core of this deep dive. When you've got a company that spent decades building a reputation, think reliability, straightforwardness, being that safe bet, a sudden really dramatic failure in a core service isn't just, a blip.
No, it feels like it fundamentally undermines everything they've built.
Precisely. It shakes the brand equity. And our source material today is this exceptionally sharp critique from a longtime customer of Specsavers.
Right. And their goal for us, the mission here, is pretty focused. We need to unpack how a service provider, really well known for sort of no-nonsense eye tests and clear interactions, allegedly just descended into what our listener called operational chaos.
Total chaos. And the real kicker, this chaos seemed to end with the company pushing, almost demanding, that complex problems get resolved over platforms like Facebook or X or Instagram.
Which is, well, we'll get into that.
Yeah, we're really zooming in on that corporate pivot, the shift away from maybe more formal resolution channels, things like recorded phone lines, towards these quick response, but maybe lower accountability social media DMs.
And that move has huge implications, doesn't it? For consumer rights,
Yeah.
maybe even data governance.
Massive implications. Absolutely.
Because Specsavers, for years, they were kind of the standard, weren't they?
Yeah.
You went there, you trusted the process, the price seemed fair, and you relied on them.
That's the baseline assumption.
And this listener's story, it really pinpoints the exact moment that trust just fractured. It went from, clear service to this fog of communication confusion.
Our job here is to really understand the mechanics of that breakdown, starting with the actual service failure itself, and then analyzing why the company's own system seemed, well, unable to handle the fallout, which then leads directly to this reliance on what feel like quite opaque digital deflection tactics.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Specifically, the systemic failures that kicked off the conflict in the first place. And it starts with something pretty astonishing. These unauthorized service bookings.
Right. The initial problem described here, it's unsettling mainly because it feels like a real breach of, well, customer autonomy. The main complaint is about what the source calls ghost appointments.
Ghost appointment.
Yeah. Scheduled services that the customer absolutely never asked for, never agreed to, wasn't even consulted about, apparently.
And the details matter here, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a typo, someone hitting the wrong key.
No, the source is quite specific. They describe a particular optician at that store just unilaterally booking them into the system. The exact phrase used was that this optician wasn't checking the customer's schedule, wasn't asking permission, just, and I quote, plunking me down in the diary like a spare character in their calendar.
Plunking. Wow.
Yeah.
That's not a professional term, is it?
It certainly conveys the feeling. And this kind of unauthorized action, it immediately throws up serious questions about the internal checks and balances, and maybe even performance pressures within the company.
How so?
Well, in any service industry, especially one linked to regulated health checks like eye tests, booking someone in without asking, it suggests one of two things. Either there's a complete breakdown in just basic, respectful customer interaction protocol,
Okay.
or, and this is perhaps more troubling, it could mean that individual staff members are under intense pressure, maybe to meet specific appointment quotas or targets.
Right. That's the crucial pivot, isn't it? If there's some internal pressure cooker metrics tied to just getting appointments on the books, regardless of whether they're actually confirmed or wanted,
Then the scheduling system stops being about the customer's convenience.
and starts serving the internal management metrics instead, it shifts from service to almost coercion.
Exactly. When a provider just takes action like that, scheduling something like an eye test without any explicit, okay, it's a pretty profound failure of respect. Respect for the customer's time, their autonomy, maybe even their data.
And the immediate result.
Trust just erodes. Instantly. The reliable provider suddenly becomes a source of anxiety because now you, the customer, feel like you have to constantly double-check, make sure nothing's been done in your name without you knowing.
You can just imagine getting that text reminder, can't you? Or an email for a health check you have zero memory of agreeing to. The source really highlights that violation of boundaries.
Hmm.
It goes way beyond inconvenience into something they called borderline creepy.
Yeah, borderline creepy management. It fundamentally changes the relationship, makes it adversarial almost from the get-go.
Okay, so this initial service error, the ghost booking, that then leads directly into the next problem, the breakdown when they tried to get it sorted.
Precisely. A catastrophic failure, really, of what you might call institutional knowledge. Once the customer spotted these weird appointments, they obviously ask, what's going on here? Why am I being booked into things I never agreed to?
Makes sense. What did the store say?
Well, the initial advice from the staff who were there seemed logical, procedural even, but turned out to be completely impossible. They were told, you need to speak to the optician about that.
Standard response, usually. Find the person responsible.
Right, find the source of the error. But here's the critical plot twist, as the source puts it. The optician who had supposedly done the booking, they'd left the company, gone entirely.
Oh, wow. So they're told to talk to someone who isn't even there.
Exactly, and this is, well, it's a classic sign, though maybe often overlooked, of some pretty deep systemic instability inside an organization. The customer is just left hanging, aren't they? Pointed towards someone who's not only unavailable, but is no longer accountable to the company or its procedures at all.
So what does that actually expose?
It suggests that the record keeping, the accountability for customer interactions, especially the errors, might have been tied too closely to individual staff members, rather than being held securely in a robust, shared, corporate data system.
The listener called this whole situation a circus, didn't they? Emphasizing how absurd it felt to be told to chase a ghost, basically.
Absolutely. How can the organization that manages the schedule tell the person complaining to go find a former employee? It implies a real failure in handover procedures, maybe data integrity.
You'd expect better, wouldn't you?
Well, modern professional service places, they rely heavily on things like audit trails, detailed CRM systems, customer relationship management systems. When someone leaves, the system has to keep all records of what they did, their communications, scheduling choices, all of it, so that the current staff can instantly see the history and actually resolve problems.
Instead, the source felt like they were being asked to do the impossible. They had that great line.
Oh, the seance line. Yeah, it really captured the frustration vividly, suggesting the only way forward was to, what was it? Hold a seance, book in a Ouija board consultation, and hope they scribble sorry for the random bookings in ghost handwriting across the lens cleaner cloth.
It turns a simple scheduling question into this surreal, incredibly frustrating quest for anyone, to
No.
take responsibility.
And look, this goes way beyond just one bad scheduling system or one mistake. It really signals a lack of a proper formalized structure for even acknowledging, let alone correcting, errors made by people who've left. If the systems don't hold on to that history properly, then every time there's staff turnover, the liability, the confusion, it just gets dumped onto the remaining staff and, critically, onto you, the customer.
Yeah, you're left holding the bag.
Exactly. And this lack of centralized accountability, that's the first major point where long-term customer confidence just gets completely shattered.
Yeah.
The customer feels like they're, chasing shadows inside a company that doesn't even seem to know what it's doing.
So, okay, they hit this dead end with the optician who'd vanished. The store level clearly couldn't fix the systemic problem. So the next logical step is to escalate it, right? Take it to the corporate level, looking for a more formal, structured fix.
That's the standard path. But this is where the whole interaction took a really sharp turn, shifted the entire conflict into a completely different technological space.
And the corporate response, detailed in the source material, this is really the pivot point for our whole analysis today about modern customer service trends, isn't it?
It really is, because the response wasn't, let's investigate. It was an immediate demand to just redirect the conversation elsewhere.
And the exact wording they got back was something like, this isn't what we like to hear. If you could drop us a message over on Facebook, X, or Instagram, we'll get this looked into for you.
That's the quote.
The sheer dissonance there is kind of staggering, isn't it? I mean, this isn't someone asking about, bank holiday opening hours.
No.
It's a serious, complex complaint. It involves potentially unauthorized data use, dodgy scheduling, and the official corporate solution is basically slide into our DMs, shunt the whole investigation onto these informal sometimes public-facing platforms.
What's really fascinating is how immediate, how almost automatic that response seems to be, funneling this serious issue away from maybe more traditional channels. And we really have to dig into the strategic differences between those traditional structured ways of solving problems and just using social media DMs.
Okay, let's start with the traditional one the source mentioned, the good old phone line. Why is calling usually seen as, well, better for accountability, even if it costs the company more to run?
Well, fundamentally, a phone line interaction, especially in a proper corporate setup, establishes a much more official, auditable kind of contract between the company and the customer. Most big corporate contact centers use these quite sophisticated workforce management systems, WFM systems,
Right.
and these systems often mandate recording pretty much every single interaction. That's for quality checks, maybe regulatory compliance, but most importantly, it creates a concrete audit trail, something legal teams or internal auditors can actually review.
So if an agent promises you something on the phone,
It's timestamped, it's recorded, it's retrievable.
huh,
If they say you'll get a refund in 5 days or we'll correct that booking, there's proof.
and that infrastructure, the WFM, the training, storing all those audio files, that's a significant cost, isn't it?
Oh, huge investment. Financial, logistical, technical.
Yeah.
But that cost is essentially buying a certain level of accountability. Plus, phone agents usually have to stick to structured scripts, follow formal policies, precisely because they know their words are being permanently recorded.
Which leads back to the sources question. Is this push towards DMs happening because phone lines mean accountability in recordings? Is it just easier to avoid that scrutiny?
That's the implication the source draws, certainly, that DMs become the corporate escape hatch. It might be easier to kind of fob people off, as they put it, with vague, non-committal answers when the chat is tucked away in a private, less formally monitored social media inbox.
Hmm. Feels less official.
It absolutely does. The whole framework is different. A private DM, while technically it exists on, say, Meta's servers, the expectation of accountability are just significantly lower. The tone's often more casual. You see emojis, generalized corporate apologies. You know the ones, we apologize for any inconvenience caused, often without any concrete promise or action.
All right, like we're looking into it versus we will call you back by Tuesday with an answer.
Exactly. It lets the representatives use that kind of vague language. We're working on it. We understand your frustration, without the pressure that comes from a WFM system demanding they log a specific resolution or a clear timeline.
But let me just push back slightly here. For some people, maybe people with hearing difficulties or anxiety about phone calls, couldn't DMs or text-based chat actually be more accessible, more convenient? Are we knocking the channel itself or how it's being used in this case?
That's a really important distinction, actually. And no, we're absolutely not criticizing the medium for, say, quick, low-stakes queries. Are you open late tonight? Where's my order? That's fine. It's efficient.
Okay.
But the complaint in our source material, it's high stakes. Unauthorized bookings, systemic errors, potential data issues. Using a private DM for that kind of complex conflict resolution, especially when the company demands the customer switch channels away from an existing complaint, well, that feels like a fundamental misuse of the platform.
It signals a shift in priorities.
It really does. It suggests the corporate priority might be speed, optics looking responsive, rather than doing the hard yards of a thorough, documented investigation.
The source really hits this hard, doesn't it? Asking if customer service has basically been demoted, put in the same bucket as memes and cat videos. It implies the strategy is about looking digitally savvy rather than actually fixing the underlying problem.
And there's likely an economic incentive driving this too. Social media teams are sometimes smaller, maybe less technically trained in complex issue resolution, sometimes even outsourced. And they might be measured on things like time to first reply, a vanity metric, really, rather than time to actual resolution.
So the incentive is to close the chat fast.
Close it quickly, maybe offer a quick, minimal apology, get it off their screen, rather than spending, say, 20 or 30 minutes on a recorded phone call, really digging into the audit trail to find out why that ghost appointment happened in the first place.
And the source's critique about fusing serious complaints with this superficial engagement, comparing it to Love Island.
Yeah, that comparison implies the customer is almost forced to perform their frustration in this format that's really designed for light, often quite emotional back and forth. It's jarring.
Meanwhile, the company gains control.
They absolutely gain control over the narrative. They can manage the crisis in these short, contained text snippets. It minimizes the chance of the conversation escalating or being recorded in a way that might, expose bigger internal flaws or inconsistencies. By pulling the conversation away from those auditable phone lines, they fundamentally dilute the transparency and the accountability you really need to fix a serious breach of trust, like dodgy scheduling. And this decision, this corporate policy almost, of mandating social media for resolving problems.
Hmm.
Well, for a company like Specsavers, it introduces this really critical issue of accessibility. It starts to look a lot like digital gatekeeping.
That's a really vital point, and the source is very clear about the demographics here. Opticians, they serve an incredibly wide range of people, right?
Yeah.
Including a very large, very loyal, older customer base.
Exactly. And these are often the very people most likely to need regular eye tests simply due to age-related vision changes. It's a core part of their customer base.
And for many people in that demographic, relying on platforms like Instagram or X, formerly Twitter, it's just not second nature, is it?
Not at all. For many, these platforms are, frankly, foreign territory, maybe things their kids or grandkids use for sharing pictures or quick messages. So to fix a complex administrative blunder, something the company caused the customer, is suddenly told they first need to get themselves a digital passport, basically, an identity on a platform they might not have or even want.
The listener had that great rhetorical question highlighting the absurdity. Something like, do they expect customers to set up a X account just to chase you for an answer?
Or worse, maybe open a TikTok and post a dance explaining their prescription in the hope Specsavers replies. It sounds ridiculous, but it points to a serious underlying issue.
Which is,
Well, it raises this really important question. When a health service provider, even a private one, starts systematically restricting how you can get problems solved, are they failing in a kind of ethical duty, a duty of universal access? Requiring digital fluency just to sort out a billing mess or a scheduling mistake that the company itself made feels like a profound failure to serve everyone. It effectively says to a big chunk of their loyal, high-need customers, look, if you want us to fix our mess, you first have to jump through our preferred technological hoop, which also happens to be our least accountable communication channel.
it's treating essential service resolution almost like it's trendy, like a digital add-on. It ignores the reality of the digital divide that still absolutely exists.
Completely. It makes getting help dependent on adopting a specific platform, rather than just offering something universally accessible, like a working phone number, or maybe a dedicated email address that isn't just an automated reply bot.
So it's gatekeeping, but using technology as the gate.
That's a good way to put it. Gatekeeping by technological requirement. And it disproportionately impacts the very people who often rely most heavily on those standard, reliable ways of communicating. Technology becomes a shield for the company rather than a bridge to the customer.
And this loops us straight back to the brand itself, doesn't it? Specsavers has spent decades, millions probably, carefully building this specific image. They're known everywhere as the kings of the cheeky shoulda gone to Specsavers adverts.
Absolutely iconic marketing.
Their entire brand strategy is built on humorously pointing out other people's mistakes, usually mistakes rooted in poor vision or just not seeing things clearly.
The irony here is just, well, it's crushing, isn't it? The company that makes its money highlighting other people's funny failures is, according to this account, riddled with its own internal systemic failures.
Ghost appointments.
Staff who vanish without a trace in the system.
And a corporate resolution process that seems designed to obscure clarity, pushing people into these low accountability DMs.
It's a stark contrast.
So what does it all mean in the end? The source basically concludes that the company's own internal operations, its customer service, has become the very thing it mocks. It's become the punchline.
Exactly. The company is now, in this narrative at least, guilty of the exact kind of systemic blind spot, the lack of clarity that they built their brand making fun of, the lack of clarity in their own scheduling, their own communication. It's become the ultimate operational should-gone somewhere else moment.
And the damage that kind of operational dissonance does to the brand equity must be severe, right? Marketing builds trust.
And poor operations just shatter it. When the company shows the world is confident, witty, precise, but the actual experience of dealing with them internally is chaotic, evasive, digitally restrictive, you don't just feel frustrated as a customer, you feel kind of betrayed.
Because they're not living up to their own standards?
They're actively committing the error they mock. And that level of irony, it makes a service failure far more memorable, far more damaging than just, say, a billing mistake from your energy company. It hits the very core of the brand promise.
It creates this real conflict for the customer, doesn't it? Like, okay, maybe I trust them to get my prescription right, but I absolutely cannot trust them to manage my appointments or sort out their own mistakes properly.
Precisely. And in any service industry, but maybe especially healthcare adjacent ones, that operational trust, it really has to come before brand loyalty can even exist. If the basics aren't right, the clever adverts don't mean much.
Okay, so we've mapped out the specific failures, the ghost bookings, the runaround with the departed staff, and then this big strategic deflection to social media.
Right.
We can now kind of pull back and see what our source material identifies as the fundamental things missing in this whole experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not about, complex corporate strategy failures in a way. It really boils down to some pretty basic business ethics, which the source distills into three core principles that were just absent.
Right. Three pillars, let's call them.
Mm.
And their absence really explains why the customer ended up with, as they put it, zero confidence going forward.
Absolutely. These are pretty universal, I think, for any business dealing with people.
So pillar number one, respect. The source highlights this as totally foundational, basically. Ask customers before you book them into anything. Simple as that.
It sounds simple, doesn't it? But respect here means acknowledging the customer's autonomy. They're a willing participant in the service, not just, a data point you can shuffle around to hit your targets.
Yeah.
A respectful system builds processes that require explicit consent, verifiable consent, ideally, before committing someone's time or resources. Those ghost appointments. That's just a complete failure of respect. It treats the customer's calendar like it's company property.
Okay. Pillar two, clarity. This means giving people straight answers when they raise concerns, not sending them off on these wild goose chases, or, worse, pointing them towards staff who aren't even there anymore.
Clarity needs solid institutional knowledge behind it. It needs systems where you can actually track what happened, an accessible audit trail. When a customer asks a perfectly valid question, why was I booked for this thing I didn't ask for? The system, the staff, should be able to provide the answer, not just an excuse or a deflection.
And telling them to find someone who's left.
That's the absolute opposite of clarity, isn't it? It just muddies the waters completely. It shifts the burden of investigation onto the person who was wrong in the first place.
Definitely. Okay, and the third pillar, access. This comes back to the communication channels. It means providing phone support, something universal, auditable, accessible, not just relying exclusively on a DM service that really only works for people who are already comfortable and active on those specific social platforms.
Access is really a measure of how inclusive a company's service is. If you claim to serve, well, pretty much everyone who needs glasses or contacts, you have to offer communication channels that actually match the diverse needs and the diverse technical abilities of that population.
So demanding that critical problem solving happens only through these sort of fleeting private digital chats.
It's a failure of access. It actually functions as a barrier. It filters out customers who either can't or won't use those platforms, or who simply, and perhaps rightly, want a more formal, transparent, maybe recorded way to communicate about a serious issue.
So if we tie this all together, the source argues quite powerfully, doesn't it, that by failing on these three pillars, respect, clarity, access, and then funneling complaints into DMs, the company is effectively, what was the phrase, ducking responsibility and hiding behind the glossy wall of social media.
That glossy wall is a great image. It provides corporate distance, doesn't it? It lets management maybe prioritize metrics like quick response time, which looks good on a dashboard, over the much harder, messier metric of actual substantive resolution.
So the company gets this superficial win. Looks responsive online.
Yeah, they maintain the illusion of being engaged, of being responsive in that digital sphere, while neatly sidestepping the deeper systemic investigation and perhaps the recorded commitments that a more formal complaint process would absolutely demand.
And choosing optics over substance like that, it must create a real vulnerability for the brand long term.
Absolutely. Because long-term loyalty, real customer trust, it's built on the substance of reliable service, reliable fixes when things go wrong, not just the speed of a generic digital apology. And, the source's experience also points to quite a profound shift in the sort of unwritten consumer contract. It used to be, I think, that if you had a serious complaint, the assumption was the company would handle the documentation, the record keeping.
Log the call, take notes.
Exactly. But now, if the company demands you move the conversation to an unstructured format like a DM, they're essentially forcing you, the customer, to take on that burden. You have to keep the screenshots, manage the thread, hope the history doesn't vanish. You become the archivist of your own complaint.
Which feels backwards. And the outcome for this particular listener, even though they mentioned having good service in the past, it's crystal clear, isn't it? This whole specific mess, the bookings, the evasion, the push to Instagram, it just resulted in a complete wipeout of trust. Zero confidence, they said.
Total loss of confidence. And notice the distinction. The failure to handle the complaint responsibly seemed to outweigh any positive history. The initial error, the booking, that was a single event, bad as it was. But the response to the complaint, that felt like a systemic policy failure.
And that's the difference.
That's critical. When the system itself, the policy for fixing things, is perceived as being evasive or inadequate, that's when the trust is often deemed irreparable.
Which brings us back to that legendary slogan, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The one that built the brand's identity.
Yeah.
But now, for this listener at least, it gets twisted into something new, something quite bitter.
Yeah. Specific to their experience, it becomes, should have gone somewhere else.
And their condition for ever going back, it wasn't complicated. It was basically a demand for the return of Business 101.
Pretty much. Bring back proper communication, bring back genuine accountability, and crucially, bring back accessible, auditable, phone-based support for all customers, not just the ones who live on social media. They're essentially demanding a return to that foundational service contract that, in this case, technology seems to have obscured rather than improved. #outro.
So to wrap up our deep dive today, we've essentially tracked one customer's really quite shocking journey, from expecting clear professional optical care to ending up in this confusing internal mess defined by unauthorized ghost appointments and then this corporate policy of deflecting serious issues onto social media platforms.
Yeah, and the failure really highlights what the source saw as the loss of those three critical pillars of good service. Fundamental, respect for the customer's time and autonomy, basic clarity in answering serious questions directly, and providing universal access to resolution channels for everyone.
We've also explored how that strategy, funneling complex complaints into private DMs, can often represent a kind of corporate trade-off, sacrificing maybe traditional accountability, the kind you get with recorded lines and formal processes, for the perceived ease, speed, and maybe metric-driven benefits of more informal digital interactions.
And the risk there is that it allows companies to potentially control the narrative better, keep things quieter, and distance themselves from that formal audit trail that's really needed to properly investigate and resolve significant systemic failures.
Which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We've seen how a formal, recorded phone line tends to imply a certain level of institutional commitment accountability, whereas an informal DM, well, it carries that inherent risk of obfuscation, of things getting lost or downplayed.
So the question then becomes, if you, as a consumer, find yourself being required, maybe even pressured, to resolve serious problems, things involving maybe unauthorized data use, or critical service failures like incorrect bookings via a communication channel that was really designed for low-stakes, often superficial engagement, how does that fundamentally change the deal? How does it redefine your rights?
Right. When the provider dictates the channel for resolution, especially steering you away from more formal routes, are they just offering you convenience? Or are they actually, perhaps strategically, altering that fundamental customer-provider power dynamic, tilting it in favor of corporate distance and maybe reduced accountability?
That's the question we leave you with today. Where is that line between convenient service and a strategy that might be designed to evade clear, recorded, accountable resolution? Something to think about.